The winter wind howled across the Montana plains as Jack Morrison checked the fence line one last time before nightfall, his weathered hands gripping the reins of his horse as snow began to fall in thick, heavy flakes. He was 62 years old, a widower for 3 years now, and the loneliness of the ranch had become as familiar to him as the calluses on his palms. Jack had inherited the 2,000-acre cattle ranch from his father, and before that from his grandfather, a legacy of hard work and isolation that stretched back generations. His wife Emma had been the light in his life, the warmth in the cold Montana winters. But cancer had taken her swiftly, leaving him alone in the sprawling ranch house with only memories and silence. The townspeople of Silver Creek knew Jack as a fair man, someone who kept to himself but would help a neighbor without hesitation. Though he rarely smiled anymore, and his eyes held a distant sadness. As the temperature dropped to 15 degrees below zero, Jack noticed something unusual near the old barn, a figure huddled against the wooden wall, barely visible through the swirling snow. He dismounted quickly, his boots crunching in the fresh powder as he approached, his heart racing with concern and caution in equal measure. The figure was a young woman, no more than 25, her lips blue with cold, her thin jacket completely inadequate for the brutal Montana winter that surrounded them. She looked up at him with frightened eyes, her whole body shaking violently, and Jack could see she was on the verge of hypothermia, her fingers white and stiff. "Please," she whispered through chattering teeth, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I didn't know where else to go. My car broke down about 5 miles back on the highway." Jack didn't hesitate. He scooped her up in his strong arms, noting how light she was, how fragile she felt, and carried her toward the ranch house as the storm intensified around them. Inside, he laid her on the couch near the fireplace, quickly building up the fire until flames roared and crackled, filling the room with much-needed heat and orange light. He brought blankets, heavy wool ones that Emma had made years ago, and wrapped them around the shivering woman, then went to make hot coffee and soup. "I'm Jack," he said when he returned, handing her a mug of steaming coffee. "You're safe here. We'll get you warmed up and figure out what to do about your car. Riley." She managed to say between sips, her hands wrapped around the mug as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Riley Chen." "I was driving to Billings for a job interview." As the evening progressed and Riley slowly warmed up, Jack learned that she had been living in her car for 2 weeks. Having left an abusive relationship in Seattle with nothing but a suitcase and hope, the job interview in Billings was her chance at a fresh start, a position as a veterinary assistant. Something she'd trained for before her ex-boyfriend had isolated her from everything and everyone she knew. Jack made up the guest room, the one that had been Emma's sewing room, and insisted Riley stay until the storm passed and her car could be towed and repaired. That night, as Jack lay in his own bed listening to the wind rattling the windows, he thought about the strange turn his quiet life had taken. How God sometimes sent people into our lives exactly when we needed them most. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. The thermometer outside the kitchen window reading -20 degrees, and Jack found Riley in the kitchen already making breakfast. "I hope you don't mind," she said with a shy smile. "I wanted to do something to thank you for saving my life, because that's what you did, you know?" Over the next few days, as they waited for the tow truck and the parts needed to fix Riley's old Honda, an unexpected friendship began to form between the grizzled rancher and the young woman. Riley helped with the morning feeding, learning quickly how to handle the cattle. Her natural way with animals evident in how even the most skittish cows seemed to trust her immediately. Jack found himself talking more than he had in 3 years, sharing stories about Emma, about the ranch, about the loneliness that had become his constant companion since his wife's death. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of work, Riley looked at Jack with tears in her eyes and said something that would change everything. "I need to tell you the truth," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "I wasn't really going to a job interview in Billings. I was running from something I'm ashamed of." Jack set down his coffee mug and listened, his weathered face showing no judgment, only patient attention and concern for this young woman who had stumbled into his life. Riley explained that she had been involved with a man named Derek, a charming manipulator who had slowly isolated her from her family, controlled her every move, and finally turned violent. 3 weeks ago, she had finally found the courage to leave, taking only what she could carry, but Derek had found her twice, tracking her down through social media and mutual friends. "I've been driving for weeks," she said, wiping tears from her cheeks, "sleeping in my car, working odd jobs for cash, trying to get far enough away that he can't find me." She explained that the job interview story was just her cover, a lie she told people because the truth felt too raw, too shameful, too complicated to share with strangers. Jack listened to it all, and when she finished, he simply said, "You're safe here, Riley. You can stay as long as you need to. Nobody's going to hurt you on my watch." The days turned into weeks, and Riley became an integral part of the ranch, her laughter bringing life back into the old house, her presence filling spaces that had been empty for too long. She proved herself to be a hard worker, rising before dawn to help with feeding, learning to mend fences, even assisting with a difficult calf birth one freezing February morning. The townspeople of Silver Creek noticed the change in Jack, how he smiled again, how he came into town more often, how the sadness in his eyes had been replaced with something like contentment. But peace never lasts forever, and on a gray afternoon in early March, a black pickup truck rolled slowly down the long driveway to Jack's ranch, and Riley's face went white when she saw it. Derek was tall and handsome in a cruel way, his smile confident and his eyes cold as he stepped out of the truck, looking around the property like he owned it. "There you are, baby," he called out to Riley, who had frozen near the barn. "I've been looking everywhere for you. It's time to come home now." Jack appeared from the stable, his presence solid and unmovable, positioning himself between Derek and Riley without saying a word, his jaw set and his eyes hard. "Who the hell are you?" Derek demanded, his tone shifting to aggression. "That's my girlfriend. We're leaving now. So mind your own business, old man." Jack's voice was quiet but carried the weight of 62 years of life, a loss of hard-earned wisdom when he spoke. "The lady doesn't want to go with you, and this is my property, so I suggest you get back in your truck." Derek laughed, a mean, sharp sound that cut through the cold air. "You think you can stop me? She's mine. She'll always be mine, and there's nothing you can do about it." What happened next happened fast. Derek moved toward Riley, his hand reaching out to grab her arm, and Jack stepped forward, his rancher's strength still formidable despite his age. The two men faced each other, tension crackling between them like electricity. And for a moment, it seemed violence was inevitable, but Jack's next words changed everything. "I've already called Sheriff Martinez," Jack said calmly, pulling his phone from his pocket. "He's been on the line this whole time, heard every word you said, every threat you made." Derek's face went from confident to uncertain, his eyes darting to the phone, then to Riley, then back to Jack, calculating his options and finding none of them good. "There's a restraining order being filed as we speak," Jack continued. "And if you ever come near Riley again, if you ever contact her, look for her or think about her, I will make sure you face every legal consequence available." Sheriff Martinez's voice crackled through the phone speaker, confirming everything Jack had said, adding that a deputy was already on the way to escort Derek off the property and take his statement. Derek stood there for a long moment, his masculine pride warring with his survival instinct. Finally, he spat on the ground and walked back to his truck, but not before throwing one last venomous look at Riley. "This isn't over," he said. But his words were empty now, hollow threats from a man who had lost his power, who had been exposed in the bright light of day. As Derek's truck disappeared down the driveway, Riley collapsed into Jack's arms, sobbing with relief, fear, gratitude, and the overwhelming emotion of finally being truly free. That evening, as they sat by the fire again, Riley looked at Jack with something like wonder in her eyes. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would you do all this for me? A stranger?" Jack was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames, and when he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion because Emma would have done the same, because it's the right thing to do. "And because you're not a stranger anymore, Riley." He told her about the night Emma died, how she had made him promise not to let the ranch become a tomb, not to let grief turn him into a ghost, to keep living and keep his heart open. "I broke that promise," he admitted. "For 3 years I just went through the motions, existing but not really living, and then you showed up in a snowstorm and reminded me what it means to care about someone." Again, Riley reached out and took his weathered hand in her younger one. "It's cold," she said softly, echoing words from weeks ago. "You can hold me if you want." Jack felt his breath catch, felt something in his chest that had been frozen for 3 years begin to thaw. Not romantic love, but something equally powerful, a sense of family, of purpose, of connection. They sat there together as the fire burned low, two souls who had found each other in the coldest, darkest time of their lives, offering each other warmth and hope and the promise of tomorrow. In the months that followed, Riley became a permanent part of the Morrison Ranch, not as hired help but as family, the daughter Jack had never had, the fresh start she had desperately needed. She enrolled in online classes to complete her veterinary assistant certification. Working the ranch during the day and studying at night, her determination inspiring Jack to take better care of himself too. The ranch prospered in ways it hadn't in years, not because of any dramatic changes, but because there was life in the house again. Laughter at the dinner table, purpose in the daily work. Riley's family, who she had been estranged from during her relationship with Derek, reconnected with her, visiting the ranch and thanking Jack with tears in their eyes for protecting their daughter when they couldn't. Jack started a program with the local women's shelter, offering the ranch as a safe place for women escaping domestic violence, a place where they could work, heal, and find their strength again. He thought Emma would have loved that, would have approved of the way he'd turned his lonely ranch into a beacon of hope for those who needed it most. A place where broken things could be made whole. On the anniversary of the night Riley had appeared in the snowstorm, they stood together on the porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of orange and purple, the cattle lowing peacefully in the distance. "I was thinking," Riley said, "about how sometimes the coldest moments in our lives lead us to the warmest places, to the people who will hold us when we need it most." Jack nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. Emma used to say that God works in mysterious ways. I think maybe she was right. Maybe everything happens for a reason. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and snow from the distant mountains, and Jack realized he wasn't lonely anymore. Realized that sometimes family isn't just blood, it's the people who show up in the storm and choose to stay. Riley smiled, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "Thank you, Jack, for stopping your breathing for a moment and really seeing me, for giving me a chance when I had nowhere else to turn." "No," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for reminding an old rancher that his heart could still beat, that life could still surprise him, that there was still warmth to be found in this cold world." And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above the Montana plains, two people who had been lost found themselves standing together. No longer alone, no longer cold, held by something stronger than circumstance, held by the simple, profound power of human kindness and the families we choose for ourselves.